precisely that the point is that we recognize that we are animals. And of course, once we recognize that, then we have to ask the question, well, what's so different about us? I mean, admittedly, we have capacities to reason and to use language that exceed any non-human animals, although I do think some non-human animals can reason to some degree and can communicate in various ways. But, I mean, that's not enough. For me, what's crucial is that we share with them the capacity to suffer.
What's that famous quote from Bentham?
Right, yes. He says, he asks what can trace what he calls the insuperable line between humans or beings that matter, that can't morally, and beings that don't. And he says, well, suppose it was reason or something. He says a horse is more reasonable than a human infant. And then he says, but suppose it were otherwise, why would it matter? The question is not whether they can talk, nor whether they can reason, but can they suffer?
Can they suffer?
Yeah, I think that's crucial.
Yes. In the abortion debate, people sometimes say it's absolutely crucial when the embryo can first feel pain, and they look at things like the development of the nervous system. What I've always felt about that is no doubt it's true that we should worry about that, but a human embryo, when its nervous system is just developed, can almost certainly feel far less pain than an adult non-human animal. And therefore there is a massive inconsistency between people who place great weight upon the exact moment when the human embryo starts to feel pain.
Well, indeed, that's absolutely right. I think that certainly a pig or a sensitive animal like that would be much more aware of its circumstances and capable of feeling pain than a human embryo. And the other thing that's relevant to the abortion issue is that I think for any woman, having an abortion is a serious decision that she will only do if she has something quite important at stake. Whereas, I mean, people who are prepared to just go into the supermarket and buy some ham don't need to do that at all. They could easily eat something else. And so they're, in fact, supporting the pain that is inflicted on those animals during their factory farm lives and in the process of slaughter for a very trivial reason. And so they certainly shouldn't be looking askance at women who have terminate their pregnancies for much more serious reasons, at least not on the grounds of pain that might be inflicted on the fetus.
There's an argument that's attributed to Russell, which goes something like, if you carry this line of thinking to its logical conclusion, we wouldn't be eating oysters and lettuce leaves and things like that.
Well, I mean, Russell was a great philosopher, but he said some things that were a bit silly, and that's one of them. I mean, lettuce, I'm sure that lettuces don't feel pain at all. There's no evidence to suggest they could. I'm also really quite doubtful whether oysters can feel pain. I mean, okay, so maybe they're animals, and people might say, well, if you're prepared to eat oysters, you're not really a vegetarian or a vegan. But I think their nervous systems are very rudimentary, and I would doubt that they could feel pain. So I'm not really going to focus on that. But it seems to me, and I'd really like to hear where you stand on this, that when we're talking about vertebrates, particularly the animals we eat, the pigs and cows and chickens and so on, there's no doubt that they can feel pain, and there's no doubt that they do feel pain in the way we rear them and produce them. So that's why I don't think we can ethically justify eating them. I mean, I think really once we accept the Darwinian picture that we're not somehow a specially created species that's been, got a God-given right to rule over the other animals, we really have to move towards not buying all of these products that come from animals and that really embody the suffering that those animals experience.
Yeah. On the oyster question, what I would say is that we don't need to draw lines, and that it's perfectly okay to talk about a continuum. Mm-hmm. And if oysters feel pain, they probably feel a very small amount of pain, right. Whereas pigs probably feel a great deal of pain. And when people say, where do you draw the line? I say, why do you have to draw lines? Why don't you just say there is a continuum of capacity to feel pain? There's also a continuum of capacity to feel the other things that we were talking about earlier, like ability to foresee the future, see what's coming, to be bereaved, and that kind of thing. Once again, there is no need to draw lines.
Right.
You can think of, just as we've got a continuum of all those things, you can say we have a continuum of moral responsibility, and our moral responsibility to oysters is quantitatively less than our moral responsibility to pigs, which is quantitatively less than our moral responsibility to humans, to the extent that humans differ in just the respects that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
What those respects are, intelligence doesn't seem to me to be relevant per se. A capacity to feel pain is highly relevant, and I suspect you're right that there's no evidence to suppose that it's any worse, any more painful for a human to have a knife drawn through its throat or something than for a pig. So the only justification I can think of for eating meat, and I confess that I do eat meat, is the one you raised earlier, which is the difference in ability to know what's coming, ability to feel fear, ability to feel bereaved, and things like that. And I think you're almost certainly right that although the position I've just laid out would be defensible if the animals were killed without the slightest idea of what's going to happen, if they were going to sort of the proverbial bullet in the back of the neck when you're not looking. Mm-hmm. Of course, that isn't the way it happens. The way they're kept in factory farms, and the way they're herded into slaughterhouses, I don't know much about it, but I suspect it's unconscionable.
I think it is, and in a way I do think, I have to say, if you do eat meat, I think you have a responsibility to know something about it, because you surely don't want to support something which, may be not only just sort of wrong slightly, but, causing really serious and prolonged suffering to beings who, you agree, can't morally. So I don't think we can just sort of turn our heads and say, please don't tell me about it. That's too much like the good Germans who, didn't want to know what was happening to those Jews who were being...
Yes, you're a much more moral person than I am, and I have to say that.
For me, what living ethically is about is about not just thinking about yourself, but putting yourself in the position of other beings who are affected by your action. So this is the kind of sort of golden rule, as it is sometimes called, of putting yourself in the position of others and asking what it would be like. And of course, Christians will say, well, that comes from Jesus, and Jews will say that also comes from the Bible. But in fact, it's something that's you find in any ethic. You find it in Confucius. You find it in early Hindu writings. So I think it's something that any tradition of ethical thinking that gets developed to a certain point, that starts to take, if you like, a broader perspective, sometimes you could call it, a point of view of the universe, will start to realize that, well, I'm just one being here among a lot of others, and there's nothing so special about me that somehow my sufferings are more important than your sufferings or anyone else's suffering, of the people out there, or for that matter, of the animals. So we get to the point where we say, really to live ethically, you have to try and think what it's like for those others who are affected by your action. And, if you say, well, why care? Of course, it's possible not to care, but then you're just cutting yourself off from a part of reality, which is there. You're denying that it matters when, when you look at it as objectively as you can, it's obvious that it matters to them as it matters to you.
Which leaves me in a very difficult moral position. I mean, I clearly, I think you have a very, very strong point when you say that anybody who eats meat has a very, very strong obligation to think seriously about it. And I don't find any very good defense. I find myself in exactly the same position as you or I would have been, well, probably you wouldn't have been, but I might have been 200 years ago, talking about, 200 years, perhaps a bit longer ago than that, talking about slavery, where somebody like Thomas Jefferson, a man of very sound ethical principles, kept slaves. It was just what one did. I mean, it was the kind of the societal norm. The historical precedent of slavery, I think, is actually rather a good one, because there was a time when it was simply the norm. Everybody did it. Some people did it with gusto and relish. Other people, like Jefferson, did it reluctantly. I would have probably done it reluctantly, and I'd sort of just gone along with what society does. But I think it's extremely hard. It was hard to defend then, yet everybody did it. And that's the sort of position I find myself in now. And I think what I'd really like to see is people like you having a far greater effect upon, I would call it consciousness raising, really, having and try to swing it round so that it becomes the societal norm not to eat meat.
Yes, absolutely, and I think what you're talking about is the pressure of social conformity, and
yes.
I think we're very much a conforming animal, and it's very hard to do things sometimes against the prevailing norms, and that's why it was hard for people who had some scruples or doubts about slavery to actually imagine that they could abolish it and live without. So I think that's, we are making it more acceptable. I think in a way the animal movement is making progress. I mean, you can walk into any supermarket here and you will find meat substitutes, meat alternatives, vegetarian dishes. You'll find soy milk, of course, and so on. So it's getting easier and it's getting more socially acceptable. And I think we just have to somehow get past that threshold where it won't be a difficult decision for people to make at all. It'll simply be something that they can see lots of people do, and they'll feel better doing it, and gradually it will become a thing of the past, as slavery has now become a thing of the past.